The creepiest and most disturbing story Mona has ever heard is of a kingdom in which there is no demise. In the story, the realm becomes so crowded that the king is forced to announce that, among all families, one person must be chosen for finality to take into another world. After the dreadful process passed, only one family remained, still struggling to let one of their members go. They come up with a solution and explain it to the king, saying that they will all lose a limb or two and, in that way, free as much space as one person's end would make. The king agrees to this mathematical workaround, and the family continues to live in prosperity and happiness. Perhaps this story and her father's profession are the reasons why, as a kid, Mona loved math so much. She likes to run too, and the pictures of how she will one day cross the line before her father inspire her to move forward. That is, until one day, her dad suddenly becomes ill. Waiting around in the hospital, frustrated and horrified, little Mona first starts knocking on wood. Mathematics is a source of safety to her, a tool to fool the reaper, and each knock represents a number in Mona's mind. Unfortunately, her father loses most of his cognitive abilities, and inspired by the story that had a great deal of effect on her psyche, Mona makes a deal with the universe. She is determined to give up everything that is important to her so that her father will come back to her as healthy as before. This is how Mona quits striving for happiness. Instead, she deliberately sabotages her life by avoiding everything that can potentially make her happy. The only thing she chooses not to part with, however, is math. Time passes then, and it is when Mona is already 20 years old that another significant thing happens in her life. One day, coming back home, she discovers that her things are all outside the house. Her mother is kicking her out, saying that she's wasting her life here. In her eyes, Mona must get a job and start a new life. There is a slight attempt to object to this, but the mother is strict in her decision, and so 20-year-old Mona is left in the streets, just outside her house, for 3 days until, with the help of her parents' finances, she rents an apartment for herself. Loneliness brings an eternity of leisure, and Mona becomes more and more desperate to get her life back when Ms. Gelband, the principal of her elementary school, calls her and tells her something extremely surprising. It turns out that they suddenly have a vacancy for the position of a mathematics teacher. She seems to have had a conversation with Mona's mother, and from her, she has learned that Mona has a college degree. She is eager to see her come and teach at her school. Mona is completely taken by dread and disappointment. Her mother is sure that her lie is justified, but Mona feels like an imposter, walking in the hallways of her school the next day. Frustrated and anxious, she comes in comical contrast with Ms. Gelband. Mona is very close to denying this perfect job opportunity until she is welcomed inside the classroom, where she was taught math by Mr. Jones. Warm and meaningful memories start coming back to Mona, and for a moment, she feels as if they push her towards accepting this role. Mr. Jones has always been as close to math as Mona. He used to have wax numbers around his neck all the time. He seems to have had a connection with numbers that was meaningful in a way only he and Mona could understand. And so, Mona redecorates her class, making it more colorful, and waits for the first graders in the next scene. Hopeful for a perfect, disciplined lesson, she stands her ground as kids rush inside cheerfully. Clearly, they have no intention to engage in tough mathematical operations, and Mona seems to be unable to do anything about it so far. This problem continues to bug her when the second graders come into her classroom. This is why she is happily surprised when the next group of kids come in for their lesson. They are third graders, and even though Mona is exhausted from trying to win the attention of first and second graders, she collects herself in one abrupt motion and notices a kid that strangely resembles her old little self. Even though this class seems much more disciplined than the others, a number of problems start arising. Mona is quick to sort out who she despises and who she loves in this class. Anne Diagano seems to be the kind of kid who must have bullied her in the days of the past, while Lisa Venus is a girl with whom she would have happily made friends. Creatively, Mona comes up with games that force the kids to be more immersed in the lesson. This is why, when another important character, Ben Smith, peeks into the classroom, he sees a small group of third graders making a human equation. He seems to be quite impressed, and the majority of the kids feel the exact same way. Mona runs back home then, eager to share her happiness with her father, and finds him in the backyard, sitting on grass, encompassed by some shape made from soil. Delusionally, he believes that this is the most reliable way to cure his condition, and holding his hand out, he asks her to join. Mona loves her father, so she agrees and starts conducting the most mythical medical procedure until her mother comes out and terminates the process. The next morning, we see the scarcity of Mona's social skills for the first time. Ben Smith, the science teacher, comes into the kitchen to take care of a burn he got from an experiment and attempts to have a conversation with her. Clearly, he is quite the opposite of Mona in terms of social skills. He tries to make her laugh, but Mona keeps on looking at her breakfast until Ms. Gelband storms inside and scolds Ben for giving out the most hilarious of assignments Mona has ever heard. This is the moment when Mona finally breaks, but unfortunately, Ben is called to the principal's office, so their conversation won't continue. After finishing her lesson with the third graders, Mona peeks inside his classroom and sees him explaining the life of fireflies to some kids. He is talking about how they find partners, and it is surprising how he raises his head and sees Mona looking inside his room right at this moment. After school, the latter finds Lisa Venus waiting for her aunt to pick her up. She seems to always be late, so the little kid is used to it. As if she were her age, Mona sits with her and learns a lot more about her. Lisa's mother seems to have an extremely rare eye cancer, but the kid seems to be avoiding taking it seriously. She is talking about, as if she were discussing the details of her breakfast. The struggles she is going through still shine through in the end. However, before leaving, she pleads with Mona to grant her a favor and never get sick. Mona is reminded of her own childhood now. Compared to Lisa, she was always enveloped by lies about her father's condition. Lisa, however, wears the truth courageously and makes her way through these difficult times like a champion. It is Mona's birthday the next morning, and her mother comes up with the plan to have breakfast together in a cafe. After sitting down, Mona's father hands her some cash quietly and asks her to get something for him from a hardware store. It is important to note that the hardware store is owned by none other than Mr. Jones, Mona's math teacher. Her father starts discussing the importance of magnet therapy then and emphasizes how the FDA mustn't find out about it. And this is the moment when suddenly Ben Smith calls Mona from the other table. He decides to be friendly, saying hello, coming to their table, and introducing himself to Mona's parents. Weirdly enough for him, only her mother engages in a conversation with him. She invites him to sit down with them, and so, despite the fact that Ben is a little troubled by Mona's father's hostile eyes, he acts politely and takes a seat next to Mona. This is when he is asked if he's from the FDA, and to cover up the peculiarity of this question, Mona's mother quickly follows it up with another one. Ben finds himself talking about how he followed his fiancée into this town and how the latter ran away with another guy in Ben's car. He makes a joke out of it, and despite the fact that he manages to create a cheerful atmosphere, Mona feels more and more anxious. The frustration rises to a level so high that she starts knocking on the table uncontrollably, trying to feel at least a slight sense of security. But when even this fails to calm her down, she jumps up, makes an excuse that she has to go to a hardware store to run some errands, and leaves the cafe quickly. Ben is a little embarrassed, and so is Mona's mother. In the next scene, she enters Mr. Jones's hardware store and sees him changing a number on his chest. According to the number, he's clearly in a bad mood. Here, Mona remembers that Jones's numbers not only correlated to his mood but to other things too. It seemed to have been connected to a wider range of events and mechanisms that run the universe. In light of this realization, one day, Mona got really angry at him. If he knows some secret about the universe, then why wouldn't he do some good with it? Mona remembers now how, after coming to this conclusion, she egged his car every Halloween. Now, standing at the counter of his shop, she buys an axe for some reason and takes it home. That night, she recalls the story of the kingdom, where demise didn't exist, and brushes her hand across the blade of the axe. The dots are connected in a rather uncomfortable fashion. She takes the axe, then straightens up in her bed and swings it at herself until Lisa Venus appears in her room, asking about the reason behind this dreadful activity, and we understand that it is only a nightmare. She takes this axe to school the next morning, decorates it with blue construction paper, and makes number 7 out of it. Coming out of her classroom, she finds her pupils laying on the floor, coughing uncontrollably and wriggling in pain. In a state of panic, she runs into the kitchen and calls 911, until the ability to perceive the world around her comes back to her, and she hears Ben Smith giving a kid named Almer an assignment to mimic a person suffering from malaria. Realizing that it was all fake, Mona hangs up the phone and turns to him in anger. Not knowing how exactly to express her fury, she tells him that he's fired. Storming out of the room, she finds Lisa acting out, having censor. All of this contributes to her raising her temper in the next scene as she explains the concepts of greater than and less than. She asks her pupils to come up and compare whatever they want of each other, and seeing what they write, she finds herself getting more and more frustrated. Violence and disease are reflected in their equations, and they write such things that come in contradiction with one another. This is why Anne and Lisa engage in a fight just before the lesson is finished, and we watch as Anne uses Lisa's mother's condition to bully her. When all but Lisa leaves the class, Mona helps her deal with anger and bitterness and receives the most genuine and heartfelt embrace from the kid. Hilariously enough, this is the exact moment when the principal walks inside the room. She sends Lisa away and, delighted to have seen such a warm sight, congratulates Mona for creating such a positive atmosphere in class. Hilariously enough, she praises Mona's methods while making her way in front of the blackboard filled with words resembling hate and brutality. Thankfully, she fails to notice an axe too and invites Mona on a school night at 8 o'clock. In the next scene, the selfishness and self-obsessiveness of Lisa's aunt make her so frustrated that all she can do is escape the coverage by exiting the building in a hurry. Outside, she finds Ben blowing bubbles in the most laid-back manner possible. He is also in the process of avoiding his parents. Last time they saw each other, Lisa fired her, but this time she finds herself smiling. Not to get too close, she attempts to get away, and when Ben does everything to make her stay, she begins a conversation about Lisa. Mona thinks that Ben shouldn't have let her fake cancer earlier that day, but clearly, Ben has a different view about all of this. He thinks of the world through the prism of science, and he knows that disease and demise are equal parts of living, just as having breakfast and loving another. It is a nice coincidence that he's blowing bubbles in this moment and asking her to do the same. Bubbles are the most fleeting representations of beauty, and in this manner, they are closely connected to human life. Mona hears as Ben remembers the first time he saw her then. The fact that she made kids pose as numbers inspired his assignment to pose as diseases. He says that right in that moment, he knew that there was something in Mona that spoke to him deeply. Mona doesn't blow any bubbles. Finding herself heating up and feeling some unusually strong emotion, she says goodbye and gets back inside. The next morning, she combs Lisa's dirty hair in the school library, telling her interesting facts about math. The kid seems to grow more and more attached to her. It all goes to a point where Lisa asks her if she can live with her after her mother passes away. Mona starts knocking uncontrollably. Having no idea how to handle this situation, she manages to turn her down as warmly as possible. But despite this, Lisa still ends up being hurt. Quite an unusual set of events unfolds in the next scene. Just before walking out of her classroom, Mona notices Ben walking with another teacher, and to avoid meeting with him, she bangs the door abruptly and tries to hide from him. Assured that he isn't looking at her, she sneaks across the room and escapes from a window. When she finally feels solid ground beneath her feet, she hears Ben's voice too, asking her if she's avoiding him. Mona says that she thought she dropped something and was trying to retrieve it, and Ben finally concludes that she is the most unusual girl he has ever met. He invites her to look for the thing she dropped together, and Mona has no reason to turn him down. While walking together, Ben learns more peculiar things about her. Mona reveals that she doesn't enjoy most of the stuff that humans tend to like. Ben wants to go see a movie, and he tries to convince her to go with him. But Mona keeps coming up with the same excuse that she has to get some nails from a hardware store. It is when Ben finally surrenders and walks away towards the theater that Mr. Jones rushes out of his store, bright-faced and totally enlightened. The number he is currently wearing is 42, and Mona takes it as a sign from the universe. She decides to go see a movie with Ben. Everything turns out even better than she expected. After finding him in the movie theater, Ben says hi, and, feeling particularly drawn towards him, Mona falls into a state of wanting to avoid being close to him again. Her excuse this time is that she has to get popcorn, but Ben says that he has plenty for two, so she returns to her seat, anxious of what will happen next. To her surprise, it is nothing special. Ben tells her about the movie and the parts she missed out on, and she responds by whispering. A man sitting behind decides to be a jerk, and after he shushes Mona more than twice, Ben turns to him and confronts him aggressively. The man leaves them alone and finds another seat, and Mona feels a kind of gravity towards Ben that she has never felt before. There is no time to think in her mind. Her feet do the work in her place, and she runs out of the cinema to her home in one quick go. She is so fast that Ben fails to catch up to her. After a few minutes, he finds himself struggling to catch his breath at her door. Mona opens the door to him and stands in the entrance as Ben asks her why she ran away. Naturally, Mona doesn't respond to this. It is even possible that she is barely conscious of the reasons underlying her avoidance. Ben notices a painting on her wall then, saying that he recognizes the hand by which it must be created, and thus, he is invited inside. For a while, the two are just talking about their pupils until Ben decides to finish up this initial part of their relationship, and takes a step towards more intimacy. He simply comes out and admits to Mona that he likes her. To him, this is a feeling that he hasn't felt towards anybody in a long time. Mona doesn't respond to this exactly. Instead, her gaze speaks for the true feelings that are currently spiraling in her heart. When Ben comes closer and Mona experiences for the first time what it is like to be kissed, and kissed in passion, she feels an immeasurable pleasure and the most significant, meaningful emotion that encroaches her entire mind for a moment. It is only for a moment, though. Suddenly, from very deep down, she is reminded that all the pleasures of life are inhibited for her. For her father's sake, she must avoid taking from life everything that is enjoyable and colorful. Excusing herself, she rushes into the bathroom and eats a bar of soap in front of a mirror. When she finally comes out of there, Ben is eager to understand why she acts in this manner, but Mona simply sends him away. She isn't ready to let herself open up to the possibility of experiencing good things in life. In the next scene, she is late to her class. Coming inside, she is greeted with an unusual sight. Anne is sitting in her seat, mocking her teaching style. Hateful and bitter, suddenly, she reveals a wax number that Mona saw on Mr. Jones. Immediately, it hits her that Anne stole it from him. And when the class is dismissed, she asks her to return it nicely. When this doesn't work, she puts much more force into her words, and Anne throws it away. Lisa is glad that her bully lost this battle. She is eager to follow Mona to meet Mr. Jones. She also wants her to come with her as she visits her mom today. Walking in a corridor afterwards, she notices Mr. Smith and asks him to tag along with them too, but the latter says that he has to show up at a club meeting. Looking over at Mona, he adds that he has to go there because he said so. He follows his words, since they always speak the truth in a straight and fearless manner. Mona and Lisa arrive at Mr. Jones's store in the next scene, but the latter seems not to be there. They make their way towards the hospital then. When Lisa runs to her mother, Mona decides to stay back and hide. Meeting new people makes her extremely anxious. Finally, Lisa has to hold her hand and take her inside to introduce her to her mother. Very soon, Mona finds herself alone with Lisa's mom. The latter seems to be quite a nice person. In a welcoming and warm fashion, she invites Mona to have a seat with her. She seems to have heard a lot about her from Lisa. To make a connection, Mona mentions how Lisa is into pirates. As she was told, it was something her father got her into. When the mother hears about this, however, she is surprised. Distressed, she finally admits that Lisa never knew her father. It is clear that she needs more warmth, and her aunt fails to provide it enough for her. Desperate for her daughter, the mother sobers up and asks Mona to look in on Lisa from time to time. Anxious to get back home and be alone, she finds wax numbers hung around her area, and puzzled by this peculiarity, she goes to Mr. Jones's house. The door stays shut, however, so she runs over to her parents' house and asks her mother if she has seen Mr. Jones lately. Terrifyingly enough, however, the latter seems to be having a different and more fearful problem. Mona's father seems to have run away. She has no idea where he is, and to add to all of this, she has recently found out that her husband hasn't been taking his pills for a long time. Mona is angry. This wouldn't have happened if she wasn't kicked out of this house. Suddenly, after her mother refuses to take any help, Mona realizes where her father must be. In the next scene, she finds him on a running track, trying to dig a hole in the ground. He says that he's trying to release an energy that will help him in the curing process. Mona has no idea how to get him out of this state. She tries using empathy and kind, warm words to make him stand up and resume taking her medicine. But in the end, she decides to lay back and simply remain by his side. The next morning, she is extremely anxious before her class. It's clear that she's going through some tough times, and all she can use now is a smooth, quick lesson. What happens next, however, is the complete opposite. One of the kids brings in her father's artificial arm, saying that it looks like number 1. They usually bring in stuff that looks like numbers on Friday as an assignment, but the kid was so excited by the prospect of showing it off to his classmates that he brought it today. He says that his dad's arm got blown off in the war, and for a while, the lesson had a wonderful start. Very quickly, however, total chaos ensues. One of his friends takes it away from him and starts running around the room while others cheer for a fight. Very soon, the cheerful, childhood atmosphere takes an unusually gloomy and grotesque turn. As Mona runs around with the kids to get the hand back to its owner, Lisa and Anne engage in a fight again. Completely unattended, Lisa takes the axe off the wall and threatens Anne, until, thankfully, Mona notices her and runs to her quickly. Strictly, she tells him to stand by the door and take the axe from her. Slowly, Lisa does as she is told, and thinking that she won the battle, Anne exclaims happily. Tired of her evil attitudes, Mona turns to her in anger and suddenly realizes she swung the axe far too closely to the little kid. Anne starts crying and, in distress, breathes quickly. Gathering herself up, Mona apologizes and stores the weapon in her drawers. For a while, it seems as if the conflict is at an end, until we all hear the cracking noise of shattering glass. They look over at the door and see Lisa banging her glass window. Now Mona runs to her and embraces her firmly, forcing her not to engage in any more destructive activities. Lisa admits, in her stress, that her mother has passed away. In Mona's arms, she cries her heart out as drops of blood roll down from her forehead. The moment is heartbreaking until the scene takes another dramatic turn. Seeing that Lisa has all the attention now, Anne takes the axe from the drawers and threatens to chop her into pieces. She backs off in tears and frustration, saying that she is sick of Lisa and Mona, until she turns around and trips over a pool of urine. One of the kids seems to have pissed themselves out of fear. The axe goes flying in the air, and all-encompassing panic fills the entire class when it goes right into Mona's right thigh. This is the moment when Matt's reign over her life is finally over. Both Lisa and Mona are in the hospital in the next scene. Rolling into her room, Mona sees that the little kid is just as lonely as she used to be. What troubles her even more, however, is seeing her knocking as a means to forget about the pain, loneliness, and anxiety bring. She never wants Lisa to follow in her footsteps and use the same methods of avoidance. She doesn't want her to feel alone either, so she grabs onto her hand strongly to make her feel loved and at peace. In the next scene, Ms. Jelbin pays her a visit. Naturally, she is extremely furious at her for bringing a weapon into school, not mentioning the fact that Mona lied about her college degree, but the principal still fails to cover up the loving attitude she has towards Mona. Light still seeps through her words as she hands her a bouquet and walks away quickly. Mona is reminded of Mr. Jones then. Resuming the search, she bangs on his door, and after no other hesitation comes into her head, she breaks inside his house. She finds him naked with some woman in his bedroom. The man is taken aback and infuriated by her sudden arrival. For a moment, he doesn't know how to react. He screams at her to leave and sees her at the door, until he realizes that Mona needs help. This is when he invites her to sit down together. He lets her know that her hardware store is left unattended, and his wax numbers are all laying around the area, all because of one woman. He seems to have reached an immeasurably high degree of happiness, and it made him realize that he cannot be defined by a number. Mona is a little bitter towards him. Since childhood, she's been loathing him for not showing any thoughtfulness or even a slight glimpse of interest in her father. After hearing this, Mr. Jones assures her that everything was quite the opposite. There seems to have been one time when he asked about her father and received nothing but cursing words from little Mona. Now he thinks that he should have asked twice, while Mona's past is reconstructed. She has always been blinded by her own bitterness and her false constructs of how love and life work. This is why she has never been able to fully be herself. She realizes now that, in seeing reality in an altered and disfigured way, she is much like her father. She has a connection with the latter in the next scene, and after opening her eyes to the seriousness of her father's condition, she accepts it as a fact. This is why she decides never to join him in his peculiar rituals anymore, and as painful as it is to her, she walks away from him. Ben knocks on her door in the next scene. Mona seems to have sent him a letter through Lisa's hands, and since it was too short, he came here to ask her to elaborate a little. Mona is already changed in this moment. Deciding to be fully honest with him, she opens up herself and tells him that, despite having feelings, she lied back then. If Ben thinks they can still be together, he should never let her go into the bathroom again. She must be expecting a passionate embrace here, but instead, Ben responds quite coolly that he has no intention to be her bathroom patrol. After saying this, he turns his back and walks away. Mona is left alone with her thoughts. Enticed to return to her older habits, she stands in front of a mirror for a while, holding a piece of soap. The fight against herself goes on for quite a while, until she hears Ben's voice coming from downstairs. The latter is quick to appear in front of her. Struggling to catch his breath, he admits that he lied too. He will gladly take on the role of her bathroom monitor. This time, Mona is the one initiating a kiss. She is so glad that he came back. They spend the entire day together, and lying in bed with him, she finds herself reaching the kind of happiness Mr. Jones talked about. An attorney comes to her door in the next scene. She says that she is one of her pupil's mothers and assures her that she has a wonderful chance in the legal case against Ann DeGano's family and the school district. In turn, after dropping a lawsuit, attending a night school, and never bringing hardware tools into the school again, she is offered her position back. And to finish her life's transformation on the most meaningful chord, she takes Lisa from her aunt and adopts her. The story she's been told throughout her childhood about the kingdom without the end seems to have been wrong about the concept of love. Now that this struggling part of her life is over, Mona realizes that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Simple mathematical equations reflect the least meaningful parts of life.